Bradley Whitfield didn't slow down when he saw him. He kept walking, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, until he was standing close enough to reach out and snap his fingers twice sharp and loud right next to the man's ear. Marcus Reed jerked awake. Bradley stepped back, looked him up and down, the green maintenance uniform, the photo on the desk, the glowing terminal screen, and laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that's designed to make someone feel small. "Unbelievable," he said, turning to his VP with a smirk. "I walk into my own building and the first thing I see is a black janitor napping on a $4,000 workstation in a restricted corridor. What is this, a shelter?" He set his coffee cup down on the desk, directly on top of the photo. "You know what, I'm not even angry," Bradley continued loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. "I'm embarrassed. Embarrassed that we let someone like this anywhere near a server room. This is exactly why we have hiring standards." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. Bradley leaned in just slightly and said quieter this time, which somehow made it worse. "Get your mop, your bucket, and whatever that is, you put on my desk and get out of my building. You were hired to clean floors, not to touch things that are way above your pay grade." Security arrived 2 minutes later. Marcus reached under Bradley's coffee cup, slid the photo out, and stood up without a word. He never looked back. But the screen behind him, the one Bradley turned away from without a second glance, that screen told a story worth $500 million. Stay until the end. You need to hear all of it. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I want to know how far this reaches. And if this is your first time here, don't leave without subscribing. This channel exists for exactly this kind of story. NextCore Technologies occupied 12 floors of a glass tower on Boylston Street in Boston's Back Bay. The kind of building where the architecture itself was designed to communicate one thing above everything else. We are serious, we are permanent, and we are not going anywhere. The lobby had real marble floors, the kind that echo when you walk across them in hard-soled shoes, which was exactly the point. The conference rooms on the upper floors had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. The espresso machine in the executive kitchen cost $11,000 and was calibrated by a technician who visited once a month. First impressions in this industry were worth money, and Bradley Whitfield understood that better than almost anyone in the building. But the real asset of NextCore Technologies wasn't the marble, or the address, or the 12 floors of open-concept offices with standing desks and a rooftop terrace that nobody used in November. The real asset sat in a climate-controlled room on the basement level behind a reinforced door that required both a key card and a 6-digit PIN to open. The Fortress Platform. In the world of enterprise data security, Fortress was considered one of the most sophisticated encrypted transaction systems in the country. It processed healthcare payment data, insurance claim records, and patient financial information for over 40 hospital networks and insurance carriers across the United States. Every single day, billions of individual data points moved through Fortress encrypted, verified, routed, and delivered with a margin of error that NextCore had always publicly maintained was less than 0.003%. It was the kind of product that made investors nervous in a good way, the kind of nervous that wrote very large checks. HealthBridge Solutions was the crown jewel of that portfolio, a healthcare payment processing company serving more than 3 million patients annually across 16 states. HealthBridge ran approximately $500 million in daily transaction volume through the Fortress platform every single day. Their contract with NextCore had been renewed just 4 months earlier, a 3-year deal worth $180 million. The ink was barely dry. The celebration dinner had barely been digested. When Fortress worked perfectly, nobody noticed. That was the nature of infrastructure. Nobody calls their insurance company to thank them for a payment processing smoothly. Nobody sends a letter to commend a platform for not failing. The silence was the product, and NextCore had been selling that silence for 9 consecutive years. But when Fortress failed, and in this industry the question was never if, only when, and how badly, it wouldn't just be headlines. It would be federal investigations. HIPAA violations carrying fines of up to $50,000 per record. Civil liability spanning dozens of hospital systems and millions of patients. The kind of catastrophe that didn't end companies quietly. It ended them in courtrooms, congressional subcommittees, and front-page stories that attached themselves to every executive's name like a permanent shadow. That was the machine Bradley Whitfield had been hired to take public. Bradley came to NextCore 18 months ago from a management consulting background, 17 years at McKinsey, where he had built a reputation for restructuring underperforming business units through financial discipline and what he privately called optics management. His MBA was from Wharton. His suits were made by a tailor in Midtown Manhattan who also dressed 3 Fortune 100 CEOs. His watch cost more than most people's first cars, and he replaced it every 2 years without exception. His cufflinks were monogrammed gold. He had never written a single line of code in his life. He had never spent more than 4 minutes inside a server room. He once referred to NextCore's engineering department as the back office in a conversation with potential investors, and when a colleague quietly corrected him afterward, the back office is the entire product. Bradley, he had smiled pleasantly and never acknowledged the comment again. What Bradley understood was narrative. He understood how companies looked to the people writing the checks. He understood that an IPO was not merely a financial event. It was a story, and every element of that story needed to project strength, discipline, and absolute control, which was precisely why he fired people the way he did. In 18 months at NextCore, Bradley Whitfield had terminated 3 employees publicly. Not in closed offices with HR representatives and signed separation agreements. In hallways, in open floors, in front of witnesses who would carry the memory back to their desks and think about it every single time they considered speaking out of turn. The first was a senior developer who had challenged a product deadline in a company-wide meeting. The second was a project manager who had emailed the board directly about a resourcing concern without routing it through Bradley first. The third was a client success manager who arrived 7 minutes late to a client presentation that Bradley himself had only attended for the final 11 minutes. Each termination followed the same choreography. Bradley appeared. Bradley made his point. Everyone watching understood the message without needing it spelled out. He called it maintaining standards. His inner circle called it something else quietly after hours in conversations that dissolved the moment anyone new entered the room. 6 months before everything unraveled, Bradley made one more decision that would come to matter enormously. He cut the budget for NextCore's annual third-party security audit by 60%. The audit was expensive, consistently uneventful, and with IPO preparation consuming bandwidth and budget across every department, it appeared to be an easy line to trim. Donna Pierce, NextCore's Chief Information Security Officer, objected in writing. Her memo was 4 pages long. She outlined 3 specific vulnerability scenarios involving the Fortress platform and formally requested a meeting to explore alternatives. Bradley's assistant replied on his behalf the following afternoon. The concern is noted. The budget adjustment will proceed as planned. Donna saved a copy of that memo in a folder on her desktop. She labeled it simply "without drama" and without any real expectation that it would ever need to be opened again, for the record. She had been in this industry long enough to know that paper trails had a way of becoming very important at the most inconvenient moments. And somewhere below those 12 floors every night for the past 2 years, a man in a green maintenance uniform pushed a cleaning cart quietly past the server room door and understood exactly what was breathing on the other side of it. The building just didn't know it yet. Marcus Reed grew up in Compton, California, in a house with a chain-link fence, a lemon tree in the backyard, and a father who believed that the most important thing a man could leave behind wasn't money or property, but the ability to fix things. Walter Reed was an electrician. He had worked for the same contracting company for 22 years, driving the same truck, wearing the same steel-toed boots, never missing a day unless one of his kids was sick. He came home every evening with grease on his hands and a particular kind of quiet satisfaction that Marcus, even as a young child, recognized as something rare. His father wasn't happy because life was easy. He was satisfied because he understood exactly how the world worked, literally structurally, from the wiring inside the walls to the circuit breaker in the basement. And that understanding made him valuable in every room he entered, regardless of what anyone thought of the color of his hands. Marcus's mother, Diane, taught 3rd grade at the elementary school 4 blocks from their house. She was the kind of teacher that students came back to visit 10 years later, not because she had been easy, but because she had been honest. She told her students the truth about the world, and then refused to let them use that truth as an excuse to stop reaching. Between the two of them, Marcus Reed never lacked for a model of what dignity looked like. He was a quiet child who took apart everything he could find and put it back together again. Radios, remote controls, and old desktop computer his uncle left behind when he moved to Phoenix. By the time he was 15, he had rebuilt that desktop from components he purchased one piece at a time with grass-cutting money, and it ran faster than anything his school's computer lab had on offer. He earned a partial scholarship to Cal State Long Beach in computer science. The rest he covered with 2 part-time jobs and a loan he mapped out on a spreadsheet the summer before freshman year, calculating exactly how long it would take to repay at various salary points. He didn't arrive on that campus with connections or legacies or the particular ease of someone who had always assumed this was where they were headed. He arrived with a plan and the discipline to execute it. He graduated with honors. His thesis advisor called it the strongest undergraduate thesis she had supervised in 11 years of teaching. His first job out of school was at Cipher Core Systems, a mid-size cybersecurity firm in San Jose. He joined as a junior analyst and was promoted twice in 3 years. In his 5th year, he identified a 0-day vulnerability in a federal payment processing system during a routine penetration test. The kind of find that typically launched careers appeared in conference presentations and landed names in trade press acknowledgement sections. The internal report credited the engineering team. Marcus's name appeared once in the footnotes. He didn't complain. That was not how Walter Reed's son was raised. In 2019, everything changed. A data theft allegation surfaced within Cipher Core proprietary source code had been copied to an external drive. The investigation moved quickly, and it moved toward Marcus. He was placed on administrative leave pending review. The evidence, when examined by an independent auditor 8 months later, pointed clearly to a different employee who had since resigned and relocated. The allegation was formally withdrawn. No charges were filed. But in the world Marcus worked in, the allegation had already done its work. His name had circulated. Hiring managers in the San Jose tech ecosystem knew the story in the version that traveled fastest, which was the first version, not the correction. He applied to 23 positions over the following 14 months. He received 4 first-round interviews, 0 offers. He was 31 years old, with a spotless employment record, a federal background check that cleared without a single flag, and no path forward in the industry he had spent his entire adult life building toward. He didn't collapse. That was also not how Walter Reed's son operated. He took what work he could find. Construction labor for 8 months, a delivery route for an online grocery service. Then 2 years ago, a night maintenance position at a corporate building in Boston's Back Bay, a city he had moved to partly because the rent was lower than California, and partly because he needed to be somewhere that didn't know his name yet. The posting was straightforward: night maintenance technician B1, and ground floor corridors 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. Marcus applied. He was hired within a week. He brought his notebook with him on his first shift and every shift after. The notebook was small, black, and battered at the corners. Inside in handwriting so compressed it was almost a private language, Marcus kept observations. Patterns he noticed on the monitoring screens visible through the corridor glass. Anomalies in system behavior that he recognized from years of professional study. He never showed anyone the notebook. He never referenced it in conversation. It was simply the habit of a man who had been trained to see things other people walked past. Tyler Oakes, the night ET supervisor, discovered what Marcus was doing by accident 6 months into his tenure. He found Marcus standing in the hallway studying an error log that had appeared on the publicly visible monitoring display outside the server room, and on instinct, Tyler asked what he was looking at. Marcus explained the error in 3 sentences. Tyler stared at him for a long moment. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Marcus told him the short version. Tyler escalated twice to HR over the following year, formally recommending that Marcus be considered for an open analyst position on the security team. Both requests were declined. The written response cited the same phrase each time: does not meet minimum certification requirements for IT department roles. Marcus kept pushing his cart. He kept filling his notebook. And 8 weeks before that Tuesday night, he looked at the monitoring screen during his rounds and wrote a single line at the top of a new page. Something is watching this system. The pattern appeared on a Thursday evening in mid-September, just after midnight, when the Boylston Street building was nearly empty, and Marcus was working his way through the B1 corridor with a mop and a cart of cleaning supplies. He saw it through the glass panel beside the server room door, the monitoring display that the night IT team used to track Fortress platform activity in real time. He had looked at that screen hundreds of times over 2 years. He knew what normal looked like in the same way his father knew the sound of a circuit that was drawing too much current before it tripped the breaker, not from a readout, from pattern recognition built over thousands of repetitions. What he saw that Thursday was not normal. The authentication request logs for Fortress's external API layer showed a cluster of failed access attempts, not random, not scattered, but sequential, arriving in measured intervals, testing one endpoint, failing, moving precisely to the next. The signature was unmistakable to anyone who had spent years studying intrusion behavior. This was automated reconnaissance. Something or someone was mapping the surface of Fortress platform, looking for a door that had been left slightly open. Marcus stood at the glass for 4 minutes. Then he went to the maintenance closet, retrieved his notebook, and wrote 3 pages in the compressed handwriting that was its own kind of code. Vulnerability type. Likely target. Escalation probability. The window in which passive reconnaissance would likely transition to active exploitation. He estimated 6 to 10 weeks. The following morning, he filed a maintenance observation ticket through NextCore's internal system, the only formal channel available to him. He wrote 9 pages in that ticket, as technically precise as anything he had produced at CipherCore, covering the vulnerability architecture, the reconnaissance pattern, and the potential exposure. He titled it clearly, Anomalous Authentication Pattern Detected in Fortress API Layer, Potential Active Reconnaissance in Progress. The ticketing system automatically categorized it as a routine maintenance observation and routed it to a general queue monitored by junior IT staff. No one with security clearance read it for 11 days. When a junior analyst finally opened the ticket, he spent approximately 6 minutes reviewing it. Noted in the system that the pattern was likely attributable to standard load balancer fluctuation and closed the ticket as resolved. Marcus found out through Tyler, who checked the system status on his behalf. He didn't allow himself anger. He allowed himself a second attempt. He asked Tyler to carry the escalation further. Tyler sent an email summary to Donna Pierce's office, flagged as urgent, explaining that a night maintenance employee with a cybersecurity background had observed something that warranted a senior review. Donna's team was stretched thin. The email landed on a Tuesday and was forwarded to a different junior analyst, not the same one who had closed the original ticket, but the result was identical. Pattern reviewed. Risk classified as low. No further action required. Marcus learned this on a Friday evening, standing in the B1 corridor with his cart, and he made a decision. He would try once more, differently. He wrote a single page. Not 9 pages, not 3. 1. Condensed to the absolute core of what he needed someone to understand what the pattern was, what it meant, and what would happen if no one addressed it within the next 4 to 6 weeks. He printed it in his clearest handwriting, signed it at the bottom, M. Read, B. One night maintenance, and asked Tyler to place it directly on Donna Pierce's physical desk before she arrived Monday morning. Tyler did exactly that. Donna found it when she came in. She read it standing up still in her coat. The technical language was accurate. The concern was specific. But there was no email address, no employee ID, no way to verify credentials or follow up through official channels. She forwarded a photo of it to a senior analyst with a note. Flag this for review. Probably nothing, but give it a look. The senior analyst looked at it. He agreed it was probably nothing. He saved the photo in a folder he had created for miscellaneous incoming observations that didn't fit neatly into any active project. He named the folder Unverified Tips. The folder had never been opened again. 3 weeks after that, Marcus tried one final time. He approached a senior security engineer named Patrick during a shift changeover, catching him in the hallway between the elevator and the IT department entrance. He introduced himself by name and by his maintenance role, then explained in 60 seconds, precisely 60, because he had rehearsed it, what he believed was happening in the Fortress authentication layer, and what he believed would happen if it wasn't addressed. Patrick listened. Patrick was not unkind. He nodded in the way that people nod when they have already decided they are not going to act on something, but do not want to have that conversation in a hallway. Thanks, man. Seriously, we'll take a look. He pushed through the door and was gone. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he turned, walked back to his cart, and resumed his route. He had done what he could do. He had tried every channel available to a man in his position. He had been clear, he had been specific, and he had been completely invisible. He kept filling his notebook. He kept checking the monitoring screen on his rounds. And every night when he badged out at the end of his shift, he looked at the pattern in his notes and recalculated the timeline. By the second week of November, his estimate had tightened considerably. It was no longer a question of weeks. On Tuesday, November 19th, Marcus was 17 minutes into his B1 corridor route when he looked through the corridor glass and stopped walking entirely. His mop handle rested against the wall. His cart sat motionless in the hallway. The pattern on the monitoring screen had changed. The reconnaissance was over. Marcus stood in the B1 corridor for 11 seconds without moving. Later, when he tried to reconstruct the exact sequence of thoughts that passed through his mind in those 11 seconds, he couldn't do it. What he remembered clearly was the feeling, not panic, not fear, but a particular kind of cold clarity that he associated with his best work. The kind that meant everything else fell away and left only the problem and the path through it. The monitoring screen showed what he had predicted and spent 8 weeks trying to prevent. The authentication failure pattern had crossed a threshold. The intervals were tightening. The access attempts were no longer testing randomly across endpoints. They had found something, a seam in the Fortress API authentication layer, and they were now pressing against it with increasing precision. This was no longer reconnaissance. The attack was live, Marcus calculated quickly. Based on the escalation rate on the screen, the attacker's automated system would breach the second authentication layer within 4 to 5 hours, somewhere between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. if the pattern held. At that point, Healthbridge's transaction pipeline would open like an unlocked door. By the time NextCore's morning team arrived and noticed something was wrong, patient records and $500 million in daily transaction data would have been flowing through an uncontrolled channel for potentially 3 hours. He pulled out his phone and called Tyler's cell. 4 rings. Voicemail. He called the NextCore IT emergency line. He was placed on hold. 40 seconds. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. He hung up and sent Tyler a text. Fortress is under active attack. B1 monitoring screen. Come now if you can. He stared at his phone for 30 seconds. No response. Marcus put his phone in his pocket and looked at the badge clipped to his uniform. The green badge that said NextCore Technologies Building Maintenance in small white letters. The badge that granted him server room access for cleaning purposes between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. He thought about his father, who drove the same truck for 22 years because the truck was how the work got done. He thought about 3 million people who had trusted a hospital or an insurance company with the most private information a person carries. Their diagnoses, their medications, the evidence of every moment their bodies had required help. Marcus Reed badged into the server room at 12:03 a.m. He found an unoccupied workstation in the far corner, a machine belonging to a daytime engineer who had left it running during an overnight system process. He sat down, cracked his knuckles once from habit, and began. The first 40 minutes were pure assessment. He needed to fully understand what he was dealing with before touching anything. Moving too quickly meant potentially triggering defensive responses that could accelerate the breach rather than stop it. Marcus moved deliberately, reading the attack the way a surgeon reads a scan before making the first incision. What he found was sophisticated. This was not an opportunistic breach or a script running off a publicly available exploit. Someone had spent weeks, possibly months, studying the fortress architecture. The attack vector they had identified was narrow and specific a race condition in the API authentication handshake that only appeared under precise conditions of simultaneous multi-source access. The exact vulnerability Marcus had documented in his 9-page maintenance ticket, his 1-page handwritten note, and his 60-second hallway conversation with Patrick. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he opened them and got to work. From 12:47 a.m. to 2:30 a.m., Marcus built a containment shell around the breach point, a temporary barrier that slowed the attacker's progress without alerting their automated system to the interference. It was the most delicate part of the night's work. Too aggressive, and the attacker would pivot to a secondary vector. Too subtle, and the containment would fail within the hour. Marcus threaded the needle with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact scenario in his mind for 8 weeks without ever expecting to execute it in practice. From 2:30 a.m. to 4:15 a.m., the attacker adapted. They shifted approach twice. The second shift at 3:47 a.m. was genuinely sophisticated. Marcus recognized it as the work of someone who knew their craft deeply, and it took him 31 minutes to counter it. At one point, his hands stopped moving entirely for nearly 4 minutes while he worked through a solution that had no direct precedent in anything he had previously encountered. He found it. From 4:15 a.m. to 5:28 a.m., Marcus rebuilt the compromised portion of the fortress authentication layer from the ground up. The attacker's access point was permanently closed. The race condition was patched at its source. Every unauthorized session was cleanly terminated. The Fortress platform returned to full operational status at 5:28 a.m., 3 minutes ahead of his internal estimate. He wrote his final log entry at 5:31 a.m., steady and precise. Active zero-day exploit neutralized, Fortress API authentication layer patched, full incident report attached. M. Reed, 5:31 a.m. He put his hands flat on the desk. His back ached from 5.5 hours in a chair adjusted for someone else. His eyes burned. His mouth was dry. He had not eaten since a sandwich at 9 p.m. the previous evening. He thought about his wife Janet, who would be waking up in 2 hours to get their daughters ready for school. He thought about the older one, who had lost her first tooth 2 weeks ago, and insisted on a photograph to document the occasion. The photograph was sitting on the desk beside the keyboard where he had placed it at the start of his shift. Because it was the same thing he did every night, set it on whatever surface was nearby. So there was something real to look at when the work got hard. Marcus Reed put his head down on his forearm just for a moment. The screen kept glowing. Bradley Whitfield's morning routine was precise to the point of ritual. He arrived at the Boylston Street building between 7:20 and 7:35 every weekday without exception. He took the side entrance to avoid the lobby traffic, walked the B1 corridor to reach the private elevator, and arrived at his office before the floor was fully populated. He called it efficiency. The 3 executive assistants who had worked for him over 18 months called it something they kept carefully to themselves. On the morning of Wednesday, November 20th, Bradley stepped through the side entrance at 7:28 a.m. with Craig Nesson half a step behind him. They were mid-conversation about the IPO roadshow calendar, which cities, which order, which institutional investors needed face time before the filing. Bradley's suit was charcoal gray. His monogrammed cufflinks caught the corridor light as he moved. He saw Marcus from 12 feet away. His pace didn't break immediately. He kept walking and kept talking for another 4 seconds, finishing his sentence before he stopped. He stood over Marcus's sleeping form and looked at him the way men like Bradley look at problems not as situations requiring understanding, but as situations requiring correction. He reached out and snapped his fingers twice, sharp and loud, directly beside Marcus's ear. Marcus jerked awake, both hands moving toward the keyboard before his eyes had fully opened. Muscle memory pulling him back to the work before consciousness fully arrived. For 2 full seconds, the room didn't exist. There was only the terminal and the task. Then the room existed. Bradley stepped back and looked at Craig. The exchange lasted less than a second and communicated everything. "Is this actually happening right now?" Bradley said. "Not a question. I walk into my own building at 7:30 in the morning and I find a black janitor asleep at a workstation in my restricted server corridor, in his cleaning uniform, at a $4,000 machine." He paused long enough for the words to settle. What does this say about us? What does this say about the standards we're projecting going into an IPO? He didn't wait for Marcus to answer. He turned to Craig fully, as though Marcus had already ceased to be a relevant presence in the room. "You know what this tells me? This tells me that somewhere in this building, someone communicated explicitly or implicitly that this kind of behavior is acceptable. That a maintenance employee can sit down at restricted company equipment in a secure area and nap and nobody stops it. I want to know how that message got sent, and I want to know who sent it." Craig nodded. Craig. He was exceptionally skilled at nodding. Bradley looked back at Marcus, who had straightened in the chair and was watching him with an expression that was entirely deliberately still. "What's your name?" "Marcus Reed." Bradley repeated it in the way someone repeats a word they're weighing but have already decided isn't worth keeping. Then he said, "Marcus, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you understand what room you're sitting outside of? Do you understand what's behind that door?" Marcus said, "Yes, sir." "Then I genuinely cannot explain to me what you thought you were doing." He raised one hand, stopping the response before it started. "Actually don't. Don't explain. I've sat through every version of every explanation available to a person in your situation, and they all arrive at the same place. He looked back at Craig. Get security down here. Get whoever manages contractor terminations on the phone. I want his badge deactivated and his contract canceled before I reach my office. He straightened his jacket at the lapels. And somebody walk me through how a maintenance employee arrives at the point where this seems like a reasonable thing to do. Because that's a process failure, and I want it on my desk by noon. From the entrance of the B1 corridor, Jalen Hughes had not moved since he arrived for his early shift at 7:24 a.m. Jalen was 24 years old, 8 months into his junior analyst role, and he had stopped walking the moment he heard the finger snapping from the corridor entrance. He understood instinctively the way everyone at NextCore understood, because the pattern had repeated enough times to be legible what was happening, and what the appropriate response from someone in his position was. He stood against the wall and did not speak, but from his angle behind Marcus's left shoulder, Jalen could see the terminal screen. He read the last visible line of the log from where he stood. Read it again. His hands, hanging at his sides, had gone completely cold. Security arrived in 3 minutes. 2 officers who moved with the appropriate urgency of people responding to a request from the CEO without knowing the specifics of why. Marcus stood before they asked him to. He reached across the desk, slid the photograph from beneath the coffee cup Bradley had placed directly on top of it, his wife, his daughters, the older one grinning with the gap where her front tooth had been, and tucked it into his uniform pocket without looking at it. He walked with the security officers toward the corridor exit at a pace that was neither hurried nor resistant. The particular steadiness of a man who had made a decision about how he would carry himself long before this moment arrived. Bradley watched him leave. Then he smoothed his jacket, glanced at Craig, and said, "Standards. The moment you allow exceptions, you lose the floor entirely. Remember that?" Craig nodded. Bradley walked to the private elevator. The doors closed. Jalen stood alone in the corridor. The terminal screen was still active. Marcus's session had not timed out. The incident log was right there, every timestamp, every entry from 12:03 a.m. to 5:31 a.m. 5 hours and 28 minutes of continuous work ending with a single clear line that Jalen read one more time to be absolutely certain he was reading it correctly. He was. He pulled out his phone and called Donna Pierce. When she answered, his voice was not entirely steady. "Donna, I need you in B1 right now. Come yourself. Don't send someone. Please." Donna Pierce arrived in the B1 corridor 6 minutes after Jalen's call, still in her coat, the coffee she had been carrying untouched and cooling in her hand. Jalen pointed at the terminal screen without speaking. Donna set her coffee down on the nearest flat surface and leaned forward. She read the log from the first entry. She was not a slow reader, but she read it slowly, deliberately, because she understood in the way that people who have spent entire careers in systems security understand that what she was looking at required the specific quality of attention that prevents misinterpretation. She read it straight through to the final line, M. Reed, 5:31 a.m. Then she straightened, looked at Jalen, and said, "Who is Mareed?" "Marcus," Jalen said. "The maintenance guy. The one who was the one Bradley terminated this morning." "Yes." Donna put both hands flat on the desk. She looked at the screen without speaking for a full 10 seconds. Then she called Tyler Oakes. Tyler arrived in 4 minutes, still pulling on his jacket. He saw the terminal from the doorway and stopped. He walked to it, read the log through once, without pausing, and then turned to Donna with an expression that told her he was not surprised, which itself told her something important. "I know who Marcus is," Tyler said. He told her everything. Not the summary. The full account. 2 years of overnight shifts, the notebook Tyler had once looked through, when Marcus left it on the break room table. The 4 separate IT incidents Marcus had resolved off the clock and off the record without being asked, without compensation, and without mentioning it to anyone except Tyler afterward. The 2 formal HR escalations Tyler had filed, both recommending Marcus for an open analyst role. Both declined. Same language, both times does not meet minimum certification requirements. Donna listened without interrupting once. When Tyler finished, the room held only the constant low machinery hum of the servers on the other side of the reinforced door. "Pull the camera footage," Donna said. Jalen brought up the B1 security archive on the adjacent workstation. The corridor footage showed Marcus badging into the server room at 12:03 a.m., the green badge moving through the door with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already resolved every internal argument. The interior camera showed him locating the corner workstation, sitting and beginning to type. It showed 5 hours and 28 minutes of a man at a keyboard leaving his chair only once at 3:15 a.m. to get water from the cooler in the corner. It showed him placing his head on his forearm at 5:31 a.m. It showed him sleeping in the posture of someone who has completed what they came to do. It showed Bradley Whitfield snapping his fingers 2 feet from his ear at 7:28 a.m. Nobody spoke during the 40 seconds of footage covering the termination. "Run the threat analysis," Donna said quietly. She moved to the primary security workstation herself. She pulled the external honeypot logs the monitoring layer NextCore maintained to detect and study inbound threats before they reached the Fortress platform directly. The logs were unambiguous. An active intrusion attempt had begun at 11:52 p.m. on Tuesday. It escalated steadily, shifted attack vector at 2:30 a.m., shifted again at 3:47 a.m. with a sophistication that made Donna stop scrolling and reread the entry twice. Then at 5:28 a.m., the intrusion stopped completely. Not a gradual withdrawal, a wall. Whatever the attacker had been pressing against was simply no longer present. Donna cross-referenced every timestamp in Marcus's log against the attacker's behavioral data in the honeypot records. The correlation was exact to within minutes throughout the entire 5.5-hour sequence. She sat very still at the workstation. Then she opened the simulation environment, a sandboxed mirror of the Fortress platform used for internal testing, and loaded it with the pre-patch version of the authentication layer. The version running before Marcus sat down at 12:03 a.m. She pushed Tuesday night's actual intrusion data through it and started the simulation. The simulation ran for 47 seconds. The screen turned red. The breach notification appeared at the 5:29 a.m. mark in the simulated timeline. Patient data exposure began immediately after. The automated impact calculator processed for 8 seconds and returned a figure that Donna read without moving. Regulatory penalties. Breach notification costs across 16 states. Civil liability from 40 hospital network clients. Contract penalties from HealthBridge Solutions alone. Total estimated financial exposure between $490 million and $810 million. Jalen, reading over her shoulder, made a sound that was not quite a word. Tyler sat down in an empty chair and put both elbows on his knees. Donna closed the simulation. She opened the internal ticket archive and searched the name Marcus Reed. The 9-page maintenance observation ticket appeared still categorized as routine maintenance, still marked resolved by a junior analyst who had spent 6 minutes reviewing it 8 weeks ago. She read the ticket in full for the first time. Every element of Marcus's analysis was technically accurate. The vulnerability type, the likely attack vector, the projected escalation window, the potential exposure figure. He had written it from memory based solely on a pattern observed through a corridor glass panel, with the rigor of a senior threat analyst filing a formal report. She found the photograph Tyler had sent of the handwritten one-page summary. She navigated to the junior analyst's folder structure and opened unverified tips. The photograph was the only item inside it. She stared at that folder name for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she stood up from the workstation and looked at the empty chair where Marcus had been sitting less than 2 hours after he had stopped the attack. The chair was still slightly angled from when he had stood to leave with the security officers. She thought about the timestamp on the termination notice HR had processed 7:34 a.m. She thought about the timestamp on the final log entry 5:31 a.m. 123 minutes between them. She picked up her phone and called Bradley Whitfield's direct line. He answered on the second ring, already in his office, already sounding like a man who had moved on to the next item on his agenda. "Bradley," she said, "we need to talk right now, not later. Now." Donna Pierce walked into Bradley Whitfield's office at 8:47 a.m. and laid it out without preamble. She placed her laptop on the corner of his desk, turned the screen toward him, and walked him through it in the order that made the most structural sense, the honeypot logs first showing the intrusion timeline beginning at 11:52 p.m. Then the simulation, the red screen, the impact calculator. Then Marcus's log timestamps from 12:03 a.m. to 5:31 a.m. Then the 9-page maintenance ticket filed 8 weeks ago, categorized automatically closed by a junior analyst in 6 minutes without escalation. Bradley listened with the expression of a man waiting for the part that was relevant to him personally. When Donna finished, he leaned back in his chair. "So the system is running clean. Healthbridge is fine. No actual breach occurred." "Correct," Donna said, "because the man you terminated at 7:30 this morning spent 5.5 hours last night making sure of it." Bradley was quiet for a moment. He tapped 2 fingers against his armrest in a slow rhythm that meant he was calculating not the technical implications but the other side, the narrative side, the IPO side. "What does the exposure look like if this gets out?" he said. "The story exposure, not the financial." Bradley, the story, is already in the building. Jalen Hughes was standing in that corridor this morning. Tyler Oakes has known who Marcus is for 2 years. The incident logs are accessible to 40 people on the IT floor. This is not something that can be contained. "Everything can be contained if it's handled quickly and correctly," Bradley said. "We are 6 weeks from filing. I am not going to allow a maintenance employee who violated access protocols to become a liability in our S1 narrative." He didn't violate access protocols. He followed Section 6.2 of our own Security Incident Policy, Emergency Access Override, authorized for any employee with direct knowledge of an active threat when standard escalation channels are unavailable within the threat window. He called Tyler. He called the emergency line and was placed on hold for 2 minutes. Every condition the policy requires was satisfied. Bradley opened his mouth. Donna continued. "He also warned us. In writing, 8 weeks ago, in a 9-page technical report that was filed as a routine maintenance observation and closed without review. He warned us again 4 weeks ago through Tyler's escalation email. He warned us a 3rd time with a handwritten summary delivered directly to my desk." She paused deliberately. "I received that summary. I forwarded it without reading it in full. That is on me, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the original ticket went through every proper channel available to someone in his position, Bradley, and it was ignored at every level." The room held a silence that neither of them rushed to fill. "Handle the technical side," Bradley said at last. "Keep this internal. As far as anyone outside this building is concerned, last night was a routine security maintenance update processed by the overnight team." Donna picked up her laptop from the corner of his desk without responding and walked out. At 10:15, A.M. Craig Nesson appeared in Bradley's doorway with the pale, slightly unfocused expression of a man who has received news he wasn't prepared to carry. Elaine Sutton, managing director of HealthBridge Solutions, had called the NextCore account line. She did not want sales. She did not want account management. She wanted to speak directly with whoever was responsible for the Fortress platform infrastructure. Her systems team had been running performance monitors all morning and had flagged something notable. Fortress response times during peak processing load were measurably better than any comparable period in the past 8 months. The authentication layer specifically was performing at a level her engineers had not seen since the platform's initial deployment. Whatever had been updated overnight had not just maintained performance, it had improved it significantly. She had one question. "Who is your infrastructure lead? I want to thank them directly." Bradley stared at Craig. Craig stared at his hands. The infrastructure lead she was asking about was currently sitting in a Roxbury apartment with his personal belongings in a cardboard box. On the IT floor, the situation Donna had described was moving faster than Bradley's containment strategy could account for. Jalen had not intended to share what he had seen that morning. But when a colleague noticed his expression at 9 a.m. and asked if he was all right, Jalen told the story once quietly to one person. That person told 2 others by 10 a.m. By 10:30, the incident log timestamps and the termination notice timestamp were both circulating in the IT team's private channel, laid out side by side in a way that required no commentary. 5:31 a.m.m. read. Exploit neutralized. 7:34 a.m.m. read. Contract terminated. 2 senior engineers filed formal HR complaints before noon. A third began drafting a letter to the board's audit committee. At 11:47 a.m., an anonymous account posted a single message to NextCore's company-wide Slack. A black man stopped a $500 million breach at 5:31 in the morning. They fired him for falling asleep at 7:34. Same company, same building, same morning. That's NextCore Technologies. Within 30 minutes, the message had collected over 100 reactions and had been screenshot by enough people that its removal would have been cosmetic at best. Patricia Langford, chair of NextCore's board of directors, received 3 communications between noon and 1:30 p.m. First, an email from Donna with the full incident report simulation results, Marcus's 9-page ticket, and his 2-year personnel record attached without comment. Second, a call from Elaine Sutton, who had still not been connected to anyone capable of answering her question. Third, a screenshot of the anonymous Slack message forwarded by a board member who had received it from a contact at another Boston tech firm who had received it from someone inside the building. Patricia read all 3 carefully. Then she opened a new email to the full board and wrote 9 words, emergency session. Wednesday, 7:30 a.m., mandatory attendance, no exceptions. She sent it at 1:44 p.m. Bradley saw the email that evening at 9:15. He sat without moving for several minutes. Then he opened a blank presentation and began building his argument. He worked until 1 a.m. He had 10 slides when he finally stopped. He did not sleep. The NextCore Technologies boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the 12th floor, with windows on 2 sides and a mahogany table long enough to seat 14. At 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday, 8 board members sat around it, and not one of them was making small talk. The coffee was untouched. The room had the particular quality of silence that gathers when people already know the shape of what is coming and are simply waiting for it to begin. Bradley Whitfield arrived at 7:12 a.m., the earliest he had come to this building in 18 months. His presentation was loaded and ready on his laptop. His suit was perfectly pressed. He had rehearsed his core argument on the drive over, trimming it to its cleanest form, removing anything that could be challenged easily. By the time Patricia Langford called the meeting to order, he was as prepared as he had ever been for anything. Patricia looked at him. "Bradley, go ahead." He stood and walked his 10 slides in a voice that was steady, measured, and confident. On Tuesday night, an employee not authorized to operate company IT equipment accessed a restricted workstation in a secure server corridor without approval, without submitting a change request, and without notifying any member of the technical leadership team. He was discovered the following morning. He was terminated in accordance with company policy. "I enforced our standards. That is what you hired me to do, and I stand behind that decision completely." He sat down, adjusted one cufflink, waited. Patricia nodded once. "Thank you." She turned to her left. Donna. Donna Pierce had no slides. She had a laptop connected to the boardroom's large wall display, and she had the particular composure of someone who has spent a career delivering difficult information to rooms that did not want to hear it. "Before I show you what actually happened," she said, "I want to make something clear. The employee Bradley is referring to is not unnamed. His name is Marcus Reed. He has worked as a night maintenance technician in this building for 2 years. He holds a computer science degree from Cal State Long Beach. Prior to joining NextCore, he spent 5 years as a professional cybersecurity engineer, during which time he identified a 0-day vulnerability in a federal payment system. He was twice recommended by our own IT supervisor for an analyst role on the security team. Both recommendations were declined by HR on certification grounds." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "Now let me show you what he did Tuesday night." She pulled up the simulation. She ran it without narration for the first 30 seconds, letting the board watch the green lines of normal Fortress activity gradually turn red as the simulated breach progressed. Then the breach notification. Then the impact calculator, climbing steadily in the bottom right corner of the screen. She stopped the simulation at $510 million. The board member at the far end of the table exhaled audibly. Nobody else made a sound. Donna walked through the honeypot logs, Marcus's incident timestamps, and the security camera footage showing him entering the server room at 12:03 a.m. She showed the footage of the termination, Bradley snapping his fingers, the brief exchange, the security escort without editorial commentary, because the footage did not require any. Tyler Oakes joined by phone to speak for 4 minutes about what he had personally witnessed over 2 years, the incidents Marcus had resolved, the expertise he had demonstrated, the recommendations Tyler had filed on his behalf that went nowhere. Then Donna pulled up the 9-page maintenance ticket. She put the filing date on screen 8 weeks prior to Tuesday night, and she put the closure notation beside it. Likely false positive from load balancer. No further action required. Time spent on review 6 minutes. She showed the 1-page handwritten summary. She showed the folder it had been saved in unverified tips. "Marcus Reed warned this company 3 times, Donna said, in writing through Tyler and in a document that reached my desk. I am including myself in this failure. I want that on the record." Elaine Sutton appeared on the wall display via video call, joining from her office in Chicago. She was brief, and she was precise. She had been in enterprise data management for 28 years. She had watched companies make every variety of catastrophic error available to human beings in positions of authority. But she told the board that in 28 years, she had never seen a company terminate the employee who had saved it, cover the incident under a narrative of protocol enforcement, and then be unable to answer when she asked to thank the person responsible. "Your liability," Elaine said directly to the camera, "is not the man who fell asleep after working through the night. Your liability is the leadership that ignored 3 written warnings from that same man and then fired him for being right." She paused. Healthbridge is suspending all contract expansion discussions pending the outcome of this meeting. The screen went dark. Patricia Langford reached into the folder in front of her and removed a single printed sheet. She read from it without looking at Bradley. Section 6.2 of NextCore's Security Incident Policy. Emergency access override is authorized for any employee with direct knowledge of an active threat when standard escalation channels are unavailable within the active threat window. She set the paper down. He called Tyler. He called the emergency line. He was placed on hold. Every condition in this policy was satisfied. And she looked at Bradley. Did you read his maintenance ticket before terminating him? Silence. Did you review Section 6.2 before concluding he had violated policy? Silence. Did you look at the screen? The silence this time was different. It had weight. Patricia turned to the board. I move for immediate removal of Bradley Whitfield as CEO on grounds of gross negligence, failure of fiduciary duty, and conduct unbecoming of executive leadership. The vote was 8-0. Bradley's 10 slides were still loaded on his laptop when he picked it up and walked out. Before the meeting formally adjourned, Patricia made a second motion. A new position, Director of Cybersecurity reporting directly to the board's audit committee, would be created and offered to Marcus Reed along with a formal written apology from the board and full back pay for all hours worked on Tuesday night. Unanimous. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table at 4:20 p.m. on Wednesday when his phone rang. He had spent most of the day doing the things that needed doing. He had updated his resume. He had opened 3 job application portals and stared at them without typing anything. He had made lunch for himself and not eaten most of it. He had looked at the photograph of his daughters for a long time, the one with the gap-toothed smile, before setting it carefully back on the shelf above the television where it belonged. The number on his phone screen was a Boston area code he didn't recognize. He let it ring twice more before he answered. Mr. Reed, my name is Patricia Langford. I'm the chair of NextCore's board of directors. I want to start by telling you that I'm calling you personally, not through HR and not through legal, because what happened to you deserves more than a form letter. Marcus sat very still. She told him everything. The simulation, the impact figure, the honeypot logs, the footage, the 9-page ticket, and the folder it had been buried in. She told him about Elaine Sutton's testimony and the 8-0 vote, and the fact that Bradley Whitfield had carried his 10-slide presentation out of the boardroom without a single member of the board having asked to see it. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Ms. Langford, he said finally, I need you to understand something. I didn't do what I did Tuesday night because I wanted recognition or a promotion. I did it because 3 million patients had their personal health records at risk, and I was the only person in that building who was awake and understood what was happening. That was the beginning and the end of my reasoning. I know, Patricia said. That's exactly why we want you back. She offered him the Director of Cybersecurity role. She explained what it meant reporting directly to the board's audit committee authority to build his own team from the ground up, a mandate to redesign NextCore's vulnerability response infrastructure from the foundation. She gave him the salary figure. She told him to take whatever time he needed to decide. 24 hours, Marcus said. I'll call you tomorrow. That evening, he sat with his wife Janet at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed. He told her everything from beginning to end, the full version he hadn't given her that morning when he'd come home with a cardboard box, and a face she'd recognized immediately as the face of a man working very hard to stay level. Janet listened without interrupting. She had been a third-grade teacher for 9 years. She had spent her entire professional life watching children discover that the world was not always fair, and deciding every day that her response to that fact would be to prepare them rather than protect them. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, you don't owe them anything. After what they did, you don't owe that building a single hour more of your time if you don't want to give it." "I know," Marcus said, "but Janet said, if you go back as the person you actually are, not as who they decided you were when they gave you a green badge and a cleaning cart." Marcus called Patricia Langford at 8 a.m. Thursday morning and accepted. He walked into the NextCore Boylston Street building at 9 a.m. through the front entrance, the main lobby with the real marble floors that echoed the way they always had under hard-soled shoes. His badge was white this time. His name on the building's digital directory that morning read Marcus Reed, Director of Cybersecurity. Jalen Hughes was waiting at the elevator bank with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Marcus without saying anything. They rode up together in silence, and the silence was entirely comfortable. Marcus's new office was on the 6th floor. It had a window facing east toward the water. He stood at it for a moment before he sat down. The story broke publicly on Friday morning. A technology journalist at Wired had received a tip nobody at NextCore ever formally identified the source, though the company's internal Slack went unusually quiet on Thursday afternoon, and the piece ran under the headline, "The $500 million Night Shift: How a Janitor Stopped a Massive Breach and Got Fired for It." The New York Times picked it up by afternoon. By Friday evening, it had reached every major outlet covering technology, finance, and labor. The details that spread fastest were the simplest ones. The 2 timestamps, 5:31 a.m. and 7:34 a.m. The 9-page report in the folder called Unverified Tips. The finger snapping. Bradley Whitfield's name was in every paragraph. His McKinsey background, his Wharton MB, his public terminations. His precise quote from the B1 corridor, confirmed by multiple sources who had been in the building that morning. His career in Boston's technology industry was finished within 72 hours. No company at his level would hire a CEO whose name had become shorthand for a specific category of institutional failure. Craig Nesson resigned before his HR review concluded. He took a mid-level compliance position at a small firm in Connecticut. Nobody wrote about it. Marcus built his team methodically. His first hire was Jalen Hughes, promoted from junior analyst to systems security engineer. His second was a senior architect he had been reading in research publications for 3 years, whom he recruited with a phone call and a conversation about the specific problem they were going to solve together. Within 60 days, the team had 6 people. Within 90 days, they had audited every layer of the Fortress platform and rebuilt the vulnerability response pipeline from scratch. Marcus instituted one policy on his first official day that applied to everyone in the building regardless of title or department. Every security observation from any employee at any level receives a documented response within 12 hours. No exceptions, no folders labeled unverified tips. Elaine Sutton did not leave. She increased Healthbridge's contract allocation by $200 million and told the Wall Street Journal that Fortress was the most reliable platform in the industry, and the reason was one engineer who stayed at his desk when everyone else had gone home. The 9-page maintenance ticket Marcus had filed 8 weeks before Tuesday night was printed framed and hung in the NextCore server room corridor on the B1 level. Beneath it, a small placard read, "Filed September 14th. Reviewed November 19th. Nobody took it down. When NextCore went public 10 months later, Marcus Reed stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when the opening bell rang. His name appeared in the S1 filing under Core Leadership Team, first in the engineering section, first on the page. His daughters watched the live stream from their grandmother's couch in Compton, wearing NextCore branded shirts Janet had ordered without telling him. His father would have understood exactly what it meant. The work had spoken for itself. It always does eventually. The building just needed to learn how to listen. Every organization has a Marcus Reed. Someone who sees what others walk past, who files the report. Nobody reads who shows up at midnight because the work demands it, not because anyone asked. The most expensive thing in any institution isn't a system failure. It's arrogance. The kind that snaps its fingers instead of asking questions. The kind that files genius under unverified tips and calls it a process. The truth doesn't need permission. It just needs time. If you've ever been the person in the room that nobody looked at, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if this channel found you at the right moment, subscribe. There are more stories like this one, and they deserve to be heard.